my name is Justin Santoli. I'm a program manager here at the Diversity and Equity Center on our Ellensburg campus. I've started here in December, actually, so I'm pretty new to the campus. I came all the way from Florida. I have a master's degree in higher education administration and my bachelor's in elementary education. And I've been doing a lot of social justice work for several years. So I started with LGBTQIA initiatives, and now I'm here working at the DEC, and it's really awesome. So that's a little bit about myself. Um, Today we're going to talk, we're going to go over allyship and learning how we can be really supportive to our LGBTQA community and some tips and tricks of things to be aware of. So this is really a teaser crash course of the full presentations that we do and we offer. So if you see this and you're really interested in receiving a more comprehensive, detailed training with your student group or with your organization, you can check out our website to find out how to sign up for some workshops in the fall and request them. So this is a little teaser. It's not going to cover everything, but we're going to do our best. So we're very active on social media. So check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Like I mentioned, our website as well is a really great resource to find out what sorts of key programs we offer. We do so much throughout the year, a lot of big signature programming, such as our Spring Festival to celebrate our AAPI students. We do Dia de los Muertos for our Latinx students, different things like that. So we offer a lot of really great programs and resources. So just some ground rules before we sort of begin is participation is voluntary. So again, the fact that you're all here really says a lot. So please have the agency to come and go as you please. Thanks all everyone for joining. Feel free to ask questions. And if you are, I want this to really be a space where you all can feel empowered to ask any questions, no matter how uncomfortable they be. So an option that you have in addition to the chat feature, and let me actually make sure I pull up the chat feature so I can follow along, is that if you want to ask a question in confidence, you can private message me and I'll ask it and answer it anonymously so that your name isn't attributed. Be aware of differing levels of knowledge. Everyone is coming with their own different levels of perspective and understanding about this topic, which is very dense. I mean, there's an entire field of academia around this stuff. So be kind to yourselves and be kind to others, right? That people are bringing their own experiences here. When you are sharing out, use I terminology, right? Because we're all talking about our own experiences and perspectives here. You have the right to pass. So if I ask a question, by no means are you obligated to answer. Expect and accept discomfort. We call this the fringe, meaning that most studies show that education really happens when you're uncomfortable, right? So if you hear something or I present an idea that seems uncomfortable, I urge you to sit in that and not try to avoid it and process what part of that is making you uncomfortable, right? Because that's really how we start to engage and learn and experience new ideas. And then the final thing is what happens in Vegas rules. So again, I want this to be a safe space where everyone can feel empowered to share their perspectives and their backgrounds. But I urge you that what is the story, the details of the stories that are shared here stay here, but what you learn from it, you take home with you, okay? Are there any questions about that? Again, for those who joined in, my name is Justin Santoli. I'm a program manager with the DEC, so I'm really excited to be here. Okay, if there are no questions, and again, feel free to continue using the chat feature if you would like. We can get started. Okay, so I'm hitting you off really hard and off the bat, and this all seems overwhelming, but I'm gonna break this down for you, okay? So bear with me, okay? And again, feel free to ask questions as we move along. There's no, let's not leave any stone unturned here. But this diagram, before we talk about allyship, it's important to just get some base knowledge, right? And a base understanding of how these things, and explaining sort of the differences between things like gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and attraction, right? Because that can get a little bit fuzzy and confusing. But again, I promise you, I'm going to do my best to make this as clear as possible. So let's just kind of talk through this, okay? So this genderbread person, I feel, really does a good job of highlighting how these things sort of interact, are in conversation with each other. So let's start with gender identity. Gender identity is the way that we assign traits and features to genders based on our sort of Western idea of gender, right? It's all socially constructed. It's completely, literally kind of fabricated and invented by our culture that we assign traits like, for example, being female, being a woman is wearing dresses, is being soft-spoken, all these kinds of old stereotypes that we have that we socialize people from the moment they're born. And then the same way for men, that we socialize the idea of being a man as being athletic, as being aggressive, as wearing suits, all those kinds of things, right? Um, and that, again, this is our Western idea of gender as we see it as two, as only being two. And that's there, we studies and our research has come to show that it's a really big spectrum of what that means and how we navigate that, right? So that's gender identity. That's why it's up here in the brain. Then we have gender expression. This is how we choose to express our gender out in the world, right? And again, we see that oftentimes our culture really heavily genders the way what's allowed, how we express our gender. So, for example, for women, we say that you have to express your gender as wearing makeup, wearing dresses, all those kinds of things. And then on the very end of the other side of the spectrum, for men, it's wearing basketball shorts or expressing it as having beards or facial hair and all those aspects, right? But again, it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Just as a personal example, I was born and I was told that I was male. I identify as male now still, but I choose to express my gender a little bit more sort of in the middle. That's why these are presented as arrows, right? Where anyone who knows me in real life knows I love my little long flowy cardigans, right? Which normally in our culture means would be considered a little bit more feminine, but I choose to express my gender as a little bit more sort of in the middle between masculine and feminine. Or now that it's becoming slightly more it's socially acceptable for men to wear nail polish, right? Which would normally be socialized as a feminine way to express your gender, but it's not related to how they necessarily identify their genders. Okay, are you all with me so far? Okay, cool. I know this gets very dense, but we're gonna get through this and then we'll continue on. Then we have biological sex, which is very interesting because even the way that this was taught a few years ago, I would have told you sex is whether you have a penis or vagina, right? But we know, but even that medical research has shown that it's a lot more complicated than that, right? That also actually exists. Biological sex also exists on a spectrum. It's not so black and white as we thought it was, because yes, obviously your external reproductive organs have a part in that, but it's also a combination of different things like chromosomes, hormones, all these aspects within your DNA, really embedded within your DNA that don't fit into these neat boxes of what it means to be a man, a biological man or a woman, right? There's also intersex people who are born with indistinguishable or really a more gray area of their genetic makeup, right? That's about 1 in 1,000 births. So that's actually a lot more common than we realize. It's just so socially stigmatized that people don't talk about it often, right? So it's actually about the same percentage as there are redheads in the world. So chances are, if you've met someone with red hair, you've also met someone who's intersex, okay? So that's biological sex, which is down here. We talked about expression, which is how you outwardly express it. Then the last thing is your attraction, or what we would call sexuality, right? Which you have these labels: straight, gay, that you might have heard of, bisexual, right? It's a little hard to see on the image down here, but the attraction is that combination of how you, what genders you find sexually and emotionally attracted to. They're not always the same thing, right? So that's where you end up with people. You know, we all have so many different experiences. Our humanity is so diverse in the way that we experience attraction and connections with people that you know, I can understand the notion that people feel like, oh, LGBTQIA, whatever, all these new letters keep popping up, but that really comes from this need to be able to assign meaning and words to our experiences. Okay, that's really kind of the crux of this whole thing. So it may seem that this is like a new thing that's come up, but it actually has existed for centuries, and you can find it in literature, you can find it in world history. It's just recently we've been empowered to have conversations about it and assign meaning to it. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Again, this was a lot. I do a whole hour on this. I do a whole half hour on this graph alone, right? So if anyone has questions, I'll leave my contact info at the end. But now, that being said, let's get into the allyship part of it, right? How we can support people who identify outside of these strict roles that our culture assigns to people. So I'm going to share this attachment. Let me just pull it up real quick for you all. Libraries, documents. Okay, so there's an attachment that I'm sending that you're more than welcome to download if you like, but I'll also share screen and swap over. Can you all see the PDF that I just shared, or do you still see the PowerPoint? Just let me know. Okay, thumbs up. You can see the PDF. Okay, so within this document, you have a list of vocabulary that would normally be part of my full workshop, but you're welcome to peruse that and read a little bit about some of the common terminology in your own time. What I want to focus on down here toward the bottom on page 5 is a coming out guide. This is actually pulled from the Safe Zone Project website, so it's an open source curriculum that you can access at any time. And so this I find really just is so good about breaking down how this stuff operates, right? So, excuse me, dry throat. So coming out is this process that someone starts to accept and identify with their gender identity or sexual orientation and starts to share that willingly with others. A big part of this, and this is what I'm highlighting in the green section, is that I think sometimes our media can portray it as this one-time event where it's like you make the big speech and then there's either a party or there's like a tragedy, right? And that's it, it's over. That's not the case, right? Coming out is actually a constant process of LGBTQ people who have to make micro decisions about how authentic they can be themselves in a given space, even in a familiar space, based on how safe they feel, right, and whether they feel they'll be prejudiced or discriminated against. So it's a constant, ongoing process. It can get pretty exhausting. Like it says here, most people are not Ellen DeGeneres, where they come out once and then the whole world knows because it spreads like wildfire. So that's important to be really mindful, and also that people might be out in some spaces, but not out in others. So as you're engaging with your peers and other people, and people are maybe are disclosing to you that they're LGBTQA, one of the first things I would say is to do one of the do's here. There's some do's and don'ts, is to check in on how confidential this is, right? So be like, okay, do our other classmates know, just so you can be aware of not outing them by mistake, because that can be really damaging, right? You're taking away their ability to make themselves feel safe. So here are some do's and don'ts. Don't say I always knew, because that downplays the significance, even if it may seem obvious that they're LGBTQ, right? It's still a big deal because that's a really vulnerable piece that can, unfortunately, I don't mean to get super serious. Oftentimes, if they come out to the wrong people, can sometimes mean death or losing their jobs or losing access to support systems, right? So don't say I always knew. Don't go bragging about it, right? They're not a little toy or a little pet that you just collected. Don't forget that they're still the person you knew, right? Absolutely nothing has changed about them. They're still the same person you always knew. They just happen to have different experiences than you. Don't cross personal boundaries. We see this a lot. I'm sure if you have ever seen an interview with like a famous trans celebrity or something like that, where the interviewer always like gets, for whatever reason, is like, well, what does that mean? What's in your pants, right? So the general rule of thumb is, if you wouldn't ask anyone else a question about like what their genitals look like, or like what kind of sexual activity they do, then it's a good rule of thumb to not ask an LGBTQ person, right? Because that's not the only aspect of who they are. And also don't assume they know why they came out to you. Also, with our do's on the upside is Know that it's a huge sign of trust, and that's awesome. That means you've really created a strong bond with that person. Remember that their sexuality is just one part of many of them. So they're not only an LGBTQA person, they might be have their experience might be affected by their race, by their socioeconomic status, by their religion, by a lot of other factors that shape their values and the way they experience the world. So understand that, right? Important not to stereotype. Show interest and curiosity about this part of them. So I know that can seem confusing after I just said don't ask probing questions, but what I'm really getting at with that is that, you know, if it's, you don't have to sugarcoat things either, right? It's okay. I think what most people in my experience are looking for when they're coming out to someone is they're looking for authenticity, right? They're looking for you to be willing to say, hey, look, I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about that label that you just shared with me that you identify as. Could you tell me, do you mind telling me a little bit more about what that means, about how you identify, or about how you experience attraction? Because that means you're opening a dialogue, right? That's a much different thing than saying, oh, so does that mean that you have a penis or a vagina, right? So it's about trusting yourself and trusting that person. And then always, I've always found this is just a general, really great suggestion for anyone. I always love being asked when I'm struggling with something is for someone to say, how can I support you? It's very simple, but it's so powerful, right? Because you're giving that person, you're sort of shifting the power onto them to be able to make decisions about, you know, for some LGBTQ people, they don't want to really talk about it at all because they just see it as one little part of them. For others, because it's so new to them, they really want to share all the research they've done and all the like videos they've watched or whatever, right? So it's just a matter of checking in with the people. So this is a really great document. Please feel free to keep this. It's just a really great guide, and you can always reach out to us. Like I said, this is part of the Safe Zone project. It's an open curriculum for educators and stuff. So there's a lot of really great resources and handouts that you can do. Okay, so as we're wrapping up, we've got about 7 minutes and I want to leave time for questions. Again, we're doing it, those who came in a little bit late, this is a very condensed version of the hour, sometimes 2 hour long workshops that the deck provides. So if it seems like I'm going quickly, I am, but you're always welcome to get the more detailed and request the more detailed version. Give myself a moment to breathe because I feel like I'm talking quite fast. But okay, so wrapping up, 5 tips for allies. Some more kind of good, some more good tips is understanding your privilege, and what that just means is understanding that you may experience that you. Let me think about the way I say this. As an LGBTQ person, and I'll just say we, meaning the LGBTQA community, because I identify within that community, is that we experience certain types of prejudice that are very specific to our sexuality. For example, a lot of states still have laws where if I disclose to my boss that I'm gay and they don't like that, they can fire me on the spot. They're called the right to work states, right? Now, when I say understand your privilege, is that when you're having an interaction with someone who is LGBTQA, it's a matter of just understanding that if you're not LGBTQA, you have the privilege of not having to think about those things in a work environment, right? Because you won't get fired for disclosing that you're heterosexual. Okay. So just understanding kind of the power that we carry in spaces. On the support side of things, another example is that if someone discloses to you and says, "Hey, I'm struggling with this," whatever, and in your eyes, you might want to say, "Well, why don't you call the police, file a police report?" For LGBTQ people, that's not always an option because there's a lot of research that shows that um, a lot of times that can mean being forcefully outed, especially in a small town like this, right? Like Ellensburg or in these small cities in Washington. So sometimes police action is not always a viable option, right? So it's again, understanding your privilege is all part of that. Listen and do your homework. So some LGBTQ people might love to share that with you, but others don't want to have to carry that emotional labor of educating you, right? So it's that classic thing that Google is free, right? So if the person, you don't want to put that emotional burden, so research. There's so much good readings out there. YouTube is so great for people sharing their own experiences, and because it's also very unique to each person, right? One person's identity as a bisexual person is going to be very different from another's. Um, speak up, not over. So this is really where the allyship comes in, is that your role as an ally, I see, is to create spaces where you can then uplift those voices, but not speak on their behalf, right? There's a big difference. You might have power in a space, and you want to wield that responsibly. Okay, you'll make mistakes. Apologize when you do. No big deal, right? Especially when it comes to like pronouns and misgendering people. It may seem like an instinct to be like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," and freak out, and you like make a whole deal out of it. But sometimes it's just as simple as if they correct you and they say, "Hey, actually, my pronouns are they them." You just say, "Oops, I'm sorry." You correct it, and you move on. No one is expecting everyone to be an academic on queer theory after half an hour of a workshop, right? So I find that most people are a lot more reasonable than what may seem sometimes portrayed in the media and such. And then ally is a verb, right? As a matter of fact, actually, this is part of like how language adapts and changes over time. Is that ally, the word ally, people are using the word advocate more often now because it's a lot more actionable. It's not so much passive. So when we're talking about allyship, it's not just about posting things on social media. It's about speaking up when someone says something that's harmful or sort of offensive to LGBTQ people. It's about um, calling out policies or things that harm LGBTQIA people, right? Doing those little steps with whatever little power that you have in a situation, if it's social or political, right? Okay, so the last thing that I'll talk about with my 2 minutes, very quick, is and this is like I said with calling out folks. This is one way that you can do that. If you hear someone using a slur or something like that, that's making a derogatory comment about queer people, is name it, claim it, and stop it. So name it. Sometimes just repeating the words back to them and ask, "Hey, why did you say that?" Right? Then you go into claim it, and if you can say, you make it yours, you make it, and also specific. So it's not to say, you wouldn't say you're a homophobe, right, for saying that, but say, "Hey, look, that one specific joke or comment you made is very homophobic because it attacks LGBTQ people," right? So being very specific, I find, is very helpful because sometimes it's a natural instinct to get defensive and say, "Oh, I didn't mean to be," but it's like, look, all I'm saying is that one specific comment was homophobic, and then stop it and just say, "Hey, I don't like that. I don't appreciate that as a queer person or as an ally. I think that that's inappropriate. So I would appreciate it if you didn't say that," right? Because the problem is that if you don't call them out in the moment, it may seem, especially in social situations, like you don't want to be the buzzkill or the bummer in the party. But the downside is that if you don't there, it gives permission to keep doing it in other spaces, right? So it's important to always just point it out in the moment, be that person as an ally, right? It's about being actionable. And then at least you've started a thought process in that person's brain. Okay, right on the dot, friends. I wanted a little bit, like 5 minutes, to do some anonymous Q&A, but I thank you all for being here. This was really great. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'll drop my email in the chat if you need a follow-up of any sort. The deck is open. We'll be around, especially during orientation season. So reach out to me if you need anything. And yeah, thank you so much.